In the meticulously choreographed world of British political rehabilitation, where ministers forced to resign for breaking ministerial code typically spend extended periods in purgatory before attempting tentative return to prominence, where admitting to underpaying £40,000 in stamp duty would normally end serious political careers, and where the convention has been that those who breach ethical standards maintain respectful distance from frontline politics whilst their party navigates difficult periods, Angela Rayner has given her first interview since stepping down as Deputy Prime Minister and has done something quite extraordinary. She has transformed forced resignation over tax irregularities into opportunity for political repositioning. She has dismissed the infighting that has engulfed Labour this week as arrogant tittle-tattle, whilst her own conduct in that infighting remains subject to speculation. And she has insisted she has not gone away, even as she claims to be focusing on constituency work rather than Westminster machinations, all whilst visiting the Hurst Hall Care Centre in her Ashton-under-Lyne constituency, where she praised heroes looking after our most vulnerable and accused Reform UK of threatening to strip away their hard-earned rights in performance that combined authentic connection to working-class roots with sophisticated political positioning for what may be imminent leadership challenge. Welcome to UK Bulletin Report, where we expose the truth about how Rayner's careful framing of her post-resignation role as opportunity to champion ordinary people, whilst dismissing Westminster tittle-tattle as arrogant represents political calculation as much as genuine constituency focus, and how her emphasis on interests like child poverty, fair pay agreements, and the Employment Rights Bill positions her as authentic Labour voice in contrast to Keir Starmer's technocratic managerialism. Subscribe now for daily analysis that refuses to accept that someone who was forced to resign for breaching ministerial code after underpaying £40,000 in stamp duty has genuinely withdrawn from frontline politics when every element of her carefully staged comeback interview suggests preparation for leadership bid that sources continue to speculate about despite official denials. The setting for Rayner's political resurrection could not have been more carefully calculated. She spoke during visit to care center in her constituency, surrounded by carers and care home residents, helping out those on shift, emphasizing her own background as former carer. This is not accidental backdrop. This is deliberate construction of narrative that positions Rayner as authentically connected to working people, as someone who understands real work and real challenges rather than as career politician consumed by Westminster ambitions. The contrast with the toxic culture in Downing Street that West Streeting described, with the briefings and counter-briefings that have characterized Starmer's leadership crisis, with the metropolitan focus of Labour's current leadership, could not be more stark or more obviously intentional. The characterization of Westminster infighting as arrogant tittle-tattle that looks arrogant when you have got real challenges that real people are facing represents sophisticated political positioning that deserves careful examination. Rayner is not merely dismissing the leadership speculation and internal warfare as unimportant. She is characterizing them as arrogant, as evidence of political class that cares more about their own positions than about the people they supposedly represent. This is populist critique of Westminster politics that positions Rayner as outside and above the very system she has been part of for 10 years, as someone who brings it back to the people she was there to represent, rather than getting consumed by internal party dynamics. But this positioning is itself political maneuvering of the most calculated kind. Rayner is not actually above the infighting. She is engaging in different form of political warfare, one that may be more effective than direct participation in leadership speculation. By appearing to focus on constituency and on policy whilst dismissing Westminster games as arrogant tittle-tattle, she is building exactly the profile that could make her formidable leadership candidate when the moment arrives. This is not withdrawal from politics. This is strategic repositioning for comeback that sources suggest may be imminent despite official denials. The insistence that she has not gone away, delivered in response to question about whether she would return to frontline politics after Streeting suggested he would love to see her back, is statement that demands parsing. Rayner could have said she is focused on constituency work with no immediate plans to return to cabinet. She could have maintained ambiguity about future intentions whilst emphasizing current priorities. Instead, she insisted she has not gone away, which is clear signal that her absence from frontline politics is temporary, that she remains politically active and relevant, that she intends to return to senior positions when circumstances permit. This is language of political leader in waiting rather than of disgraced minister accepting diminished role.
The list of interests that Rayner identifies, child poverty, fair pay agreements, and making sure the Employment Rights Bill is carried out in full, provides indication of the policy platform she would offer in leadership campaign. These are not random selections. These are issues that connect to labor's traditional working class base, that resonate with trade unions who remain influential in leadership contests, that distinguish authentic labor values from the managerial centrism that Starmer represents. This is policy positioning designed to appeal to exactly the constituencies that would determine outcome of leadership challenge. The fact that she articulates these priorities so clearly in her first post-resignation interview suggests they have been carefully considered and that they form foundation of potential leadership platform.
The timing of this interview amid self-inflicted row about Starmer's leadership, which saw Streeting declare there is toxic culture in Downing Street that needs to change, is obviously not coincidental. Rayner is inserting herself into moment of maximum vulnerability for Starmer, positioning herself as voice of authentic labor values and constituency focus whilst others engage in destructive internal warfare. Her response to Streeting's comments manages to acknowledge the crisis without directly attacking Starmer, to validate criticism of toxic culture without explicitly joining that criticism, and to position herself as above the fray, whilst actually engaging in sophisticated political positioning. This is masterclass in how to participate in leadership speculation whilst maintaining plausible deniability about ambitions. The call for party unity, reminding colleagues that Labour should be focusing on changing lives to deliver for Britain after 14 long years of Tory rule, follows standard script for politicians positioning for leadership. Every potential leadership candidate calls for unity whilst their rivals tear each other apart. Every challenger insists on focusing on voters rather than on internal disputes. Every ambitious politician claims to prioritize delivery over Westminster games. These ritualistic phrases allow participation in leadership speculation whilst maintaining deniability about personal ambitions. Rayner is following this script with precision that suggests sophisticated understanding of leadership campaign dynamics and careful preparation for challenge that she publicly denies contemplating. The litany of labor achievements that Rayner catalogs, free breakfast clubs for kids in schools, rolling out more free meals at lunchtime, more police on the street, bringing down NHS waiting lists, the Renters' Rights Act, represents attempt to defend government record whilst acknowledging that this record is being drowned out by internal warfare. But the very need to list these achievements in defensive fashion reveals how ineffective the government has been at communicating success or at making voters feel that their lives are improving. If these achievements were tangible and appreciated, if they were genuinely changing lives as Rayner claims, then she would not need to catalog them whilst urging that they not be drowned out by tittle-tattle. The fact that she does suggests these achievements exist more in ministerial press releases than in lived experience of British families. The circumstances of Rayner's resignation deserve examination because they reveal both vulnerabilities that could prevent her from becoming leader and narrative of persecution that she could exploit in leadership campaign. She was forced to resign after admitting not paying enough stamp duty on her seaside home in Hove. The PM's ethics chief, Sir Laurie Magnus, ruled she had broken the rules by underpaying the tax by £40,000 on the property in East Sussex. The rapid probe said she had acted with integrity and with dedicated and exemplary commitment to public service, but found she had breached the ministerial code. This creates complicated legacy that any leadership campaign would need to navigate. On one hand, she breached ministerial code through significant tax underpayment, which rivals would certainly weaponize in leadership contest. The characterization of underpaying £40,000 in stamp duty as technical breach rather than as substantive ethical failure would be challenged by those arguing that Labour ministers must be held to higher standards than they apply to others. On the other hand, the finding that she acted with integrity whilst making technical breach creates narrative that she was forced out for honest mistake rather than for deliberate wrongdoing. And the fact that she was removed for tax underpayment whilst other politicians survive far more serious scandals could be framed as persecution of working-class women by establishment that holds her to standards it does not apply to privileged men. The emphasis on care workers and on her background as former carer is central to Rayner's political identity and to the narrative she is constructing for potential leadership campaign. Her statement that she feels a bit angry because care workers are almost forgotten, that everyone values them but that this value does not translate into adequate support or compensation, positions her as champion of essential workers who are undervalued by society and by political system.
Her description of spending hour at care center watching staff assess people with complex care needs, use hoists, ensure proper dietary requirements and medication, grounds her political rhetoric in concrete observation of difficult work that care requires. This is not abstract policy discussion conducted from ministerial office. This is politician demonstrating authentic connection to work and to workers that most Westminster politicians cannot credibly claim. The fact that she spent the morning of the interview speaking with carers, care home residents, and helping out those on shift reinforces image of someone who remains connected to working people and to real work, rather than being consumed by Westminster bubble. This authenticity, whether genuine or performed, is political asset that distinguishes Rayner from rivals who lack similar backgrounds or connections.
The accusation that Reform UK threatens to strip away care workers' hard-earned rights introduces partisan political element to what otherwise appears as non-political constituency visit. This is a reminder that Rayner remains Labour politician engaged in political warfare even whilst claiming to be above Westminster tittle-tattle. The specific targeting of Reform is significant because Reform represents political threat that Labour establishment fears most, the party that is pulling working-class voters away from Labour through combination of immigration restriction, economic nationalism, and rejection of progressive cultural politics that many traditional Labour voters find alienating. By positioning herself as defender of workers' rights against Reform threat, Rayner is claiming territory that Labour desperately needs to hold if it is to prevent electoral catastrophe. The emphasis on the Employment Rights Bill, particularly the legally binding pledge that sets minimum pay and employment terms for care workers in England, provides concrete policy achievement that Rayner can claim credit for and that demonstrates her commitment to issues she advocates. This is not merely rhetorical positioning. This is pointing to actual legislation that improves lives of workers in sector where she has personal experience and authentic credibility. This combination of personal background, policy achievement, and continued advocacy creates compelling narrative for politician who wants to present herself as delivering for working people rather than merely talking about them.